Hi folks, you're with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio no pictures live stream. Please listen to this essay as you would a radio broadcast as you're driving along in your car, your truck, or in public transport. In this presentation, I'd like to talk about the issue of getting above yourself. Maybe an egomaniac out of control, somebody not recognizing their proper position in society and their social status within the group. Or this could be a social group or a business, a corporation, a structure, a bureaucratic structure, for example, but getting above yourself. This is the thing. Now, what sort of got me under this is, well, a number of things, but I'm recently reading a history of setting up of various departments in wartime in Britain, and the biggest problem, or among the biggest problems, the people putting these things together foresaw wasn't the sheer issue of getting the resources, finding the money, finding the expertise, getting the equipment built. And remember, it's wartime, for goodness sakes, and they're in danger of possible invasion any day. So you'd think that minds would be focused on that. But in fact, no, not that there wasn't consideration of that, there was, but as much, if not more, consideration was given to the social status of people within these various groups that were being established. And so we're talking about new bureaucracies maybe being developed to or put together to focus on a specific issue. And one of them was a group that was to be developing specialist landing craft for landing on beaches and places like that, carrying troops to. So you'd think, well, that's pretty straightforward. But considering the people that had to be in charge, now the view was that if you didn't come from an aristocratic background, you couldn't be in charge of it. At the senior level, you had to be an aristocrat. Now, the reasons for that were that these aristocrats would have to deal with other aristocrats, and an aristocrat wouldn't like to deal with a commoner or somebody who had the job for technical competence. People who were technically competent were viewed as lacking the tact and diplomacy and just the sheer good manners that would be necessary for these people to interact. So if you're the head of a department or group and you may be technically competent, you would be lacking in the social graces necessary to communicate with other people who were from the upper class. Now, it didn't mean that the upper class people didn't themselves have some qualification, but the idea that people who were middle class, or certainly not aristocrats, people were middle class, lower middle class, even working class, or the hard-working and industrious and bright working class, might have technical competence, but their boorish manners, their lack of tact and diplomacy, and so on, would mean that they couldn't function in any sort of a managerial or supervisory role. Nonetheless, it was accepted that the people who had technical competence were still needed. But the real problem, as the people of the day saw it, we're talking like 1940, 41, 42, that sort of thing. The real problem was that these technically competent people were getting above themselves. They were assuming they had authority and they had a prominent sort of upper position in the decision-making hierarchy that in fact they didn't have. And these people had to be put in their place. They had to be shown that whatever technical qualifications or competencies they may have, that really didn't matter. The more important thing was the exquisite good manners, polite society, and now it didn't mean that it was a binary thing that someone had exquisite good manners or they had no manners at all. That can't have been it. But this idea of getting above yourself, you have a social status and you are assuming airs and graces and power and influence beyond your social status. So you're getting above yourself and we have to smack you down. We have to put you in your place. We have to bust your chops. We have to make sure you understand that you're not anywhere near as important as you may think. When we need your expertise, then we'll ask you for it and we'll put a question, but that's it. Don't think you've got any position beyond that. Now you can imagine the dysfunction that was occurring in such, things weren't getting done because people were running around trying to be very diplomatic or pretending to be. They would attend these long all-day meetings where all they would do would be polite to one another and nothing of substance was discussed. No problems were solved, and there was no forward progress. So things that should have taken months to do were taking years to do, and it's hard to believe that it could have been this inefficient. Now, again, people with a lot of social connections, as these people do, they come from the right schools and the right universities and the right class, so they're all hiring each other. So this created, if you like, a dead weight in all things that were being done. Now, it's difficult to imagine this. You're about to be invaded and killed off, and some of these people had their names on the list that the German government had for people who would have to swing from the end of a rope if Britain was invaded. So it wasn't like there were low stakes or the dangers were irrelevant or inconsequential, and yet still they were more concerned about the etiquette of. So if a technical expert was brought in who wasn't of the right breed, they would have discussions afterwards that they didn't hold their teacup in the right way, or that they didn't eat their sandwiches with the proper etiquette and things which were considered to be sins of the first order. Now my grandparents, who are moderately well to do, sent me to a school for young gentlemen and this sort of thing overseas, and so I remember the etiquette lessons that I had to endure, which were everything from how you would eat a piece of cake or a biscuit, or how you would hold a cup for tea, and this sort of thing. They used to cover all that stuff then, and not like I'm ancient, for goodness sakes, but this was some of the things that were going on. Even in the schools when I was, and this, I was quite young. I was younger than 10 anyway. So etiquette and manners and poise and graces, and there's a certain way of talking to one another. Now, the sensibilities of the people concerned seemed to be quite acute, because it wouldn't take much to upset them and to decide, well, we're not going to include Billy Bob or Jimmy Jack or whoever in the next meeting because their manners aren't good enough. and again, some of these people were the lords and the aristocrats. Some of them were competent enough, but their priority was as they would see it, tact and diplomacy, which meant that if it takes you a year to do something that is desperately and urgently needed to be done in a week, then that's fine if you take the year to do it, because you've done it in the right tactful and diplomatic way. Now, so the airs and graces thing was getting above yourself. Sometimes there were aristocrats of a lower rank, and they were getting above themselves. Now, the idea was, if somebody just declared there was urgency, we got to get on with this, it's important, and somebody would come into the mix who was prepared to take the responsibility to get it done, they were viewed as getting above themselves. You're cutting out or you're bypassing people of a superior social status, and they have to give it their blessing, and if they don't give it their blessing, it shouldn't go ahead. And these sort of you have to really understand, I suppose, a class society to be able to perceive this, but you see it too in places like third world countries. I was at a hotel once where the management were all Western, the hotel manager, the assistant manager, the catering manager, they were all Western people, and they got things done. But for some reason, one day one of them was sick, the other was away at a conference, another one was, and that the next person in charge in the breakfast, the breakfast restaurant. The next person in charge was a local guy, but he wasn't a senior person. He wasn't a tribal elder. And social etiquette has it that only tribal elders can make decisions, and he's not prepared to make a decision because that means he'd be acting above himself. He'd be assuming. So he can't make a decision. So they've put all the chairs have been stacked. One of the breakfast restaurants is closed for renovations, and the tables have all been brought out for this other breakfast restaurant. But the decision to put the tables out so people can sit at them, there's a Western clientele, people can sit at them, he can't make that decision because he'd be acting above himself if he did. So he has to confer with the tribal elder. So the tribal elder has to actually come, and they have to meet, and they have to go through a ritual that shows respect to the social system. And now, while they're all having these meetings, and the queue is going for miles for people wanting breakfast, everything comes to a shuddering halt because this kid can't make the decision. And one of the catering managers, or one of the Western managers, who's sick in bed, and you can tell he's very sick, he gets dragged out of bed to come and solve it. And he comes in the middle of a you do this, get those chairs, move that, put those tables here, the problem's solved in 5 minutes, and suddenly everything's back. But that goes to show how much etiquette. And this kid, or the young man who was the next in line, the local boy, he wasn't prepared to make that decision because he was acting above himself. Now, coming to sort of more modern times, today, and particularly with things like diversity, equity, inclusion, affirmative action, and so on, we need to understand that or come to grips with the issue that really none of these people who are being promoted into senior managerial positions, none of them are there on technical competence or qualifications, credentials. None of them are there for those reasons. They're there for moral reasons. But if the straight white male comes in to make decisions or sees things that are falling to pieces, because of all these incompetent people, if he comes up with that, then he's acting above himself. And morally and socially, he's got to be put the fuck back into his place. And he's got to be, told, you shut up, you Nazi. So we've declared really all straight, competent, technically competent straight white males as being Nazis, little better than Hitler, if not worse than Hitler. And so from a moral, social perspective, they had to be put in their place, and they can't be allowed to act above themselves. For example, if you complain, the people that protest in Britain are acting above themselves. They can't be allowed to have a voice or an influence of things. Whereas, the brown people who have higher socio-moral status, they can be allowed to do that. So this is an example today of acting above yourself, which is really a wider extension, as I see it, of the class system, just now rewritten along the lines of social, moral type perspectives along Marxist lines. We could even see this in, say, the Soviet Union or communist countries, where if you had the right back, you were an illiterate peasant, for example, then you had a higher moral status than someone who is a highly accomplished and credentialed person, because they represent a social power elite, and you're wishing to invert the whole thing. So they're getting above themselves now in the new society that you're building. And I think this is in a big way what we're facing today in the West. You're Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for listening.